The night was supposed to belong to him. Inside the grand ballroom, chandeliers glittered like 1,000 diamonds, music floated in the air, and laughter echoed across velvet curtains. Andrew Lawson, a man once considered the rising star of New York's business world, stood at the center of it all. His tuxedo was perfectly tailored, his glass of champagne never empty, and his smug smile never leaving his face. Tonight was not just another charity gala. For Andrew, it was a stage, a chance to parade his new life and humiliate the woman he thought he had destroyed. "Wait until you see my ex-wife walk in," he whispered to a group of investors, his voice laced with arrogance. "She has nothing. She'll look pathetic. You'll understand why I left her." They chuckled, raising their glasses, feeding his ego. But behind the polished marble doors, the truth was preparing to strike harder than he ever imagined. Because Emma Lawson, the poor ex-wife he had abandoned with nothing but tears and children to feed, was no longer the fragile woman who once begged him to stay. No, Emma was about to arrive, and her entrance would shatter every illusion Andrew built for himself. The murmurs began when the doorman stepped aside. Outside, the low hum of an engine broke through the music. Guests turned their heads as a sleek black limousine rolled up to the red carpet. The flash of cameras went wild. And then she appeared. Emma Lawson stepped out, her gown flowing like a river of midnight silk, her hand resting gently on the arm of Richard Hale, a billionaire whose name alone commanded respect. In the other arm, Richard carried a little boy, while Emma held the hand of a young girl with her same eyes. The ballroom gasped. Rings sparkled, children smiled, and dignity returned. Emma hadn't come to be shamed. She had come to end the game. And as Andrew's glass slipped from his hand, crashing to the floor, everyone realized the night was no longer his. It was hers. Before the limousine, before the cameras, before the ring on her finger, Emma Lawson was just a woman trying to survive. She wasn't born into wealth. She didn't carry a famous last name. She carried responsibility, heartbreak, and 2 little children who depended on her more than life itself. Emma was 30 years old, a quiet school teacher in a small public elementary school in Queens. Her salary barely covered rent, groceries, and daycare. Nights were often spent at the kitchen table, bills scattered around her, while her children slept in the tiny bedroom they shared. She clipped coupons, skipped meals so her kids could eat, and wore the same winter coat for 5 years. Life was hard, but Emma's spirit was unbreakable. Once upon a time, she thought marriage would protect her. Andrew Lawson, her ex-husband, had promised the world. He was charming back then, all smiles and ambition. Emma believed him. She stood by his side when he had nothing, cheering him on when he dreamed of building a business empire. She worked double shifts at school, even took weekend tutoring jobs just to help him chase his dreams. But Andrew's dreams came true, and so did Emma's nightmare. The moment money entered his life, love left the marriage. He began spending nights out, whispering on phone calls Emma wasn't meant to hear. He started criticizing her, her clothes, her simple habits, her lack of class. The final blow came the day he told her she was a burden. He left her with 2 children, an empty bank account, and a broken heart. For months, Emma cried in silence. She wiped away tears before her children woke up, smiling so they wouldn't see her pain. At school, she put on a brave face for her students, though her soul felt heavy. No one knew the depth of her suffering. She felt invisible, discarded like yesterday's news. But what Andrew didn't know was that broken women can rise higher than anyone expects. Life had other plans for Emma. On a rainy afternoon, while helping in a library fundraiser, she met Richard Hale. He wasn't the kind of man who dazzled with charm and empty promises. He was steady, grounded, and he saw something in Emma no one else did: strength. Richard didn't look at her as a poor, abandoned mother. He looked at her as a woman with courage. Slowly, carefully, he stepped into her life. He brought warmth back into her children's days, laughter into their tiny apartment, and respect back into Emma's world. What started as friendship turned into something deeper, something unshakable. Emma still carried scars, but now she carried hope too. She found love that honored her, not used her. She found a partner who lifted her, not dragged her down. And when he slipped a diamond ring onto her finger, it wasn't just a proposal. It was proof that she was never worthless. The poor, invisible schoolteacher had become the woman Andrew could never have imagined, loved, powerful, and unafraid to face him again. And when the gala doors opened, it wasn't just Emma walking in, it was every tear she had shed, every night she had suffered, transformed into strength. The Bright Horizons Charity Gala was no ordinary event. It was the crown jewel of New York's social calendar, the kind of night where power and money mingled under chandeliers worth more than most homes. The ballroom of the Astoria Grand Hotel glittered from floor to ceiling. Golden light spilled across marble floors polished to a mirror shine. Crystal glasses clinked in every corner, carrying champagne that flowed as freely as gossip. Men in tailored tuxedos and women draped in gowns that could pay off a mortgage whispered in clusters, trading business cards disguised as pleasantries. The air carried the scent of lilies, imported just for the night, mixed with expensive perfumes that lingered long after their owners passed by. Waiters in white gloves floated through the room, balancing silver trays with hors d'oeuvres that looked more like art than food. At the center of it all stood Andrew Lawson. For him, this gala was more than charity. It was theater. He strutted across the ballroom as if he owned it, shaking hands, flashing his rehearsed smile, every gesture designed to scream success. On his arm was Cassandra, his mistress, dressed in a scarlet gown that dared everyone to notice. She basked in the stares, enjoying the whispers. Andrew introduced her with pride, like a trophy, while pretending his ex-wife had never existed. But Emma Lawson did exist, and her absence was deliberate. Andrew wanted her there, wanted her to see the life she had lost. He had mailed the invitation himself, smirking at the thought of her walking in with cheap shoes, shamed in front of his world. To him, it was the perfect revenge. The orchestra swelled, violins filling the air with elegance. Guests raised glasses and toasts, cameras flashed, and for a moment it seemed like nothing could disrupt the illusion. But illusions never last. Outside the grand doors, the sound of an engine hummed low and steady. A limousine slid into view, its sleek body reflecting the golden lights of the hotel. Curious guests craned their necks, whispering, "Who's arriving this late?" Inside the ballroom, Andrew straightened his jacket, ready to sneer at whoever dared to arrive after him. Cassandra tightened her grip on his arm, her eyes glittering with the thrill of superiority. But as the doorman pulled open the heavy doors, silence spread like wildfire. The music faltered, conversations froze, and every head turned. What they saw wasn't another investor or socialite. It was something no one expected. Emma Lawson stepped into the light. The woman Andrew thought he had broken, the woman he had invited only to humiliate, now stood radiant, untouchable. On her arm was Richard Hale, a billionaire whose very presence demanded respect. Behind them, two children followed closely, their innocence shining brighter than the chandeliers above. The whispers began, but they weren't mocking. They were awed. The poor ex-wife had not come in shame, she had come in glory. And in that instant, the glittering ballroom that Andrew had built as his stage transformed into the scene of his greatest downfall. Andrew Lawson wasn't born into wealth. He clawed his way up, starting as a salesman at a car dealership. Back then, his charm worked like magic. He could sell anyone a dream, and that charm was what had first pulled Emma into his world. But charm without integrity always rots into arrogance, and Andrew had become the perfect example of it. When he married Emma, she believed in his ambition. She believed in them. She sacrificed, worked extra jobs, and carried his burdens when success seemed far away. But when money came, Andrew changed. He wasn't the hungry dreamer anymore. He was the man who looked at his wife and saw only limits. He began sneering at her modest dresses, rolling his eyes at her coupon cutting, mocking her quiet life as a teacher. What kind of wife can't even look the part? He once snapped when she showed up at a business dinner in a simple black dress. Emma had bitten her lip, hiding her tears, but she stayed. She wanted to believe love was stronger than money. She wanted to believe in the man she married. But Andrew had already traded love for power. Nights grew longer, excuses thinner. Emma knew the perfume on his suits wasn't hers. She knew the lipstick smudges weren't from her. When she finally confronted him, he didn't deny it. Instead, he laughed, cruel and dismissive. "You should be grateful I even keep you around," he sneered. "Without me, you're nothing. Just a poor little teacher with two kids to drag around." That was the moment Emma's world collapsed. He left her with the children and moved into a penthouse with Cassandra, a younger woman dazzled by his money. He flaunted her like a prize, taking her to galas, posing for photographers, as if his marriage to Emma had never existed. But arrogance has a way of blinding men. Andrew believed Emma would fade into the shadows, invisible and forgotten. He underestimated her, and worse, he underestimated karma. Now, standing in the ballroom with Cassandra clinging to his arm, Andrew's arrogance was on full display. He smirked at his investors, whispering how pathetic Emma would look when she arrived. He boasted that she would beg for his help once she realized how far beneath him she had fallen. His words dripped with contempt, feeding the egos of those who laughed along with him. "Some women just don't know their place," he said, sipping his champagne. "But don't worry, you'll see soon enough." And then, the doors opened. The smirk froze on his face. His glass trembled in his hand. For the first time in years, Andrew felt powerless. The woman he thought he had destroyed walked in stronger than ever, flanked by power, wealth, and love. The same woman he once called nothing was now everything he feared. And as the whispers spread across the ballroom, Andrew Lawson realized too late, his greatest enemy wasn't another businessman. It was the woman he had thrown away. The hush inside the ballroom was deafening. For a few seconds, no one breathed. The doors of the Astoria Grand swung wide open, and the sight that met the crowd's eyes was not what Andrew Lawson had promised them. He had painted a picture of a pathetic woman, dragging her worn-out shoes into the glittering world she no longer belonged to. But what entered was not a shadow of his past. It was his reckoning. Emma Lawson stood poised, her midnight silk gown hugging her figure with elegance that rivaled every woman in the room. Her hair glistened under the chandeliers, her shoulders straight, her gaze steady. On her arm, Richard Hale radiated quiet authority, his presence enough to command silence, even without a word. The billionaire's tailored suit gleamed with subtle luxury. But what truly spoke volumes was the way he looked at Emma, with pride, with devotion, with respect. The whispers erupted like wildfire. "That's Emma Lawson? Isn't that Richard Hale with her? And those children, are they hers?" Every eye darted between Andrew and the woman he had discarded. The shame he wanted her to carry now clung to him like a curse. Andrew's hand clenched around his champagne glass. It shattered, spraying drops across his cuff. He didn't notice the sting. All he saw was Emma walking into his world, not broken, not begging, but shining. Cassandra tugged at his sleeve, her smile faltering. For the first time that evening, she felt invisible. Emma didn't rush. She let every step echo against the marble floor, the sound of heels striking like thunder in Andrew's chest. Richard gently guided her through the sea of shocked faces, while Emma's daughter clutched her mother's hand, her son resting safely in Richard's arms. The picture they created was undeniable, a family, whole and untouchable. The host, flustered, attempted to regain control. "Ladies and gentlemen, let us welcome," but the applause drowned him out. It wasn't polite clapping. It was thunderous, rising, relentless. Guests rose from their seats, celebrating the woman who had risen from ashes. Cameras flashed, capturing the moment that would flood tabloids by morning. The poor ex-wife who returned in triumph. Andrew's face burned red. He forced a laugh, brittle and hollow, and muttered to the men beside him, "It's all a show. Smoke and mirrors. She'll always be nothing." But no one laughed with him. They were too busy watching Emma. Emma's eyes met Andrew's across the ballroom. She didn't sneer, didn't gloat. Her calm smile was more cutting than any insult. In that smile was a message. "You don't own me anymore. You never did." Cassandra leaned closer, her voice trembling. "Andrew, everyone is staring." But he couldn't answer. His carefully orchestrated spectacle had crumbled. The humiliation he had planned for Emma had returned like a boomerang, striking him in front of the very people whose approval he craved most. And as Emma lifted her daughter onto her hip and stood tall beside Richard, Andrew realized the truth he could no longer escape. The night belonged to her, and the shame belonged to him. Long before the limousine, the gown, and the thunderous applause, Emma Lawson had lived nights so heavy that she thought she would never stand again. Behind her calm smile tonight lay memories of heartbreak that could have destroyed anyone weaker. After Andrew walked out, leaving her with nothing but 2 children and overdue bills, Emma collapsed into a life of survival. She cried in the bathroom late at night so her children wouldn't hear. She pressed her hand over her mouth to muffle the sobs, her shoulders shaking, her heart begging for answers that never came. She remembered the look on her daughter's face when she asked, "Mommy, where's Daddy?" Emma forced a smile through tears, whispering, "He's busy, sweetheart," even though her soul cracked at the lie. There were days she almost gave up. She stared at empty cupboards, wondering how to make 1 box of pasta feed 3 mouths. She patched old shoes with glue, hoping no one at school would notice. She worked until her body ached, taking tutoring sessions long after her voice went hoarse. And still, it felt like drowning. Her lowest point came one winter night. The heat in her tiny apartment broke down. Emma wrapped her children in blankets, huddling them close, whispering stories to keep them from noticing the cold. When they finally fell asleep, she sat in the dark, staring at the frost on the window. Her hands trembled, her chest felt hollow, and for the first time, she wondered if Andrew had been right. Maybe she was nothing. Maybe she really was just a poor teacher, destined to disappear. That was the night she almost broke. But something stopped her, the sound of her son's soft breathing. She looked at her children's small faces and realized she couldn't give up. Even if the world threw her away, she would fight for them. They became her anchor, her reason to rise every morning when despair told her to stay in bed. Still, the scars were real. Emma carried shame for months, afraid to face people who had once envied her. She avoided old friends, skipped events, and lived like a ghost in her own life. Her reflection in the mirror was unrecognizable, a pale woman with hollow eyes and a smile that no longer reached her soul. That collapse could have ended her story. But pain, when carried long enough, can transform. Emma's suffering became her strength. The woman who once doubted her worth learned resilience brick by brick, tear by tear. And when Richard Hale stepped into her life, offering not rescue but respect, Emma found the courage to stand again. So when she walked into the gala tonight, it wasn't just glamour that followed her. It was every tear, every sleepless night, every broken moment that she had survived. And though Andrew thought he had destroyed her, he could never know how close she had come to breaking, and how powerful she became for choosing to rise instead. To the glittering ballroom, Richard Hale looked like the perfect partner, the billionaire whose arm Emma held with quiet confidence. But behind that calm smile lay a truth almost no one knew. Richard was not just Emma's new love. He was the reason she had risen from the ashes. Their story didn't begin with limousines or sparkling rings. It began in the simplest of places, a library fundraiser at the school where Emma taught. She had volunteered, exhausted but determined to help her students. Richard, a philanthropist known for his anonymous donations, had attended quietly. While others boasted about their wealth, Richard noticed Emma. Not her dress, not her makeup, but her eyes, the kind of eyes that had cried too many tears yet still held light. At first, Emma thought nothing of their brief conversation. She was polite, shy even, embarrassed by her worn-out shoes and the tired lines on her face. But Richard saw something powerful in her, resilience. A few weeks later, when the library announced a grant from Richard's foundation, Emma was shocked to see her name listed as a key contributor. She hadn't asked for help, but he had seen her worth and chosen to invest in her quiet fight. What Emma never realized was that Richard had followed her story long before they met. He had been an investor in Andrew's company years earlier, watching from afar as Andrew rose in wealth but sank in integrity. He had heard whispers of how Andrew treated his wife, dismissive, cruel, unfaithful. It had disturbed him, though at the time Emma was just a name he barely knew. But the night he met her face to face, everything clicked. Richard wasn't stepping into Emma's life to pity her. He stepped in because he believed she deserved better. Slowly he became a friend to her children, showing up with books, toys, and gentle encouragement. To Emma, he offered no grand promises, only consistency, the very thing Andrew had denied her. And then came the twist no one in the ballroom knew. Richard had quietly purchased controlling shares in Andrew's company months before. While Andrew bragged to his circle about his dominance, he didn't realize he was already standing on shaky ground. Richard had done it not to destroy Andrew, but to protect Emma. He wanted to make sure the man who once mocked her would never hold power over her again. When he finally slipped a diamond ring onto Emma's finger, it wasn't just a proposal of love. It was a shield, a declaration that she was no longer alone. She was walking into the world with a man who not only loved her, but also believed in her worth enough to rebuild her life from the foundation up. And so, as Emma stood in the ballroom, hand in hand with Richard, the real twist shimmered beneath the chandeliers. Her comeback was never just about money or appearances. It was about truth, respect, and a love so powerful it turned her scars into armor. And while Andrew had planned to unveil her humiliation tonight, it was Richard who unveiled the truth. Emma was never weak. She only needed someone to remind her how strong she already was. The Emma who stepped into the ballroom that night was not the same woman who once cried in silence, clutching overdue bills while her children slept in the next room. No, this was a woman reborn, polished by pain and sharpened by perseverance. Her transformation hadn't happened overnight. It had been a journey, step by painful step, that turned humiliation into strength. It began the moment she decided she would no longer be defined by Andrew's betrayal. At first, the change was small. She started standing taller in the school hallways, looking her students in the eye with confidence instead of exhaustion. She took back control of her mornings, replacing tears with quiet determination, waking up early to run, to breathe, to remind herself she was still alive. Then came the outward changes. Richard, though wealthy beyond imagination, never forced luxury on her. Instead, he gave her space to rediscover herself. Emma enrolled in evening classes, personal development, public speaking, even finance. For the first time, she wasn't just surviving, she was building. Knowledge became her weapon, discipline her armor. But the real transformation came from within. Emma stopped apologizing for existing. She stopped hiding her scars, realizing they were proof of her endurance. She found beauty not in flawless makeup or designer clothes, but in the way her children's laughter returned when they felt her strength again. Slowly, her reflection in the mirror no longer showed a broken woman, but one ready to rise. Richard supported her in every step, but it was Emma who chose her path. She picked the gown she wore that night herself. Midnight silk, elegant but commanding, the kind of dress that said she was not there to blend in. The jeweler who sized her ring was stunned when she asked not for flashy diamonds, but for something timeless, a symbol of permanence rather than performance. And when she walked into that ballroom, holding Richard's arm, it wasn't just fabric and jewels that made her radiant. It was the unshakable knowledge of her worth. Every head that turned, every whisper that followed her, only confirmed what she already knew. She had transformed from a victim into a force. The guests could see it. The cameras captured it. But Andrew felt it most of all. For years he had convinced himself Emma was weak, small, forgettable. But the woman before him was powerful, magnetic, commanding the room without even raising her voice. His smirk crumbled because her transformation was undeniable. Emma had not come to beg. She had not come to shrink under his shadow. She had come to prove without words that she was never beneath him. She had risen above. And as the chandeliers bathed her in golden light, Emma's transformation was complete. No longer Andrew's ex-wife, no longer a forgotten teacher, but a woman who had conquered despair and returned stronger than anyone imagined. The gala had reached its peak. The orchestra swelled, glasses clinked, and cameras flashed as the city's elite basked in their own reflections. But beneath the glittering chandeliers, tension coiled tight. Andrew Lawson was sweating through his tuxedo. He had planned to humiliate Emma, to parade Cassandra as proof that he had traded up. Instead, every eye in the room was on Emma, radiant and untouchable beside Richard Hale. Andrew couldn't stand it. He pushed through the crowd, his smile forced, his voice sharp. Well, he sneered loud enough for everyone to hear. Look who decided to show up, dressed up like she belongs here. Laughter trickled from a few nervous guests, but it didn't last. All eyes shifted back to Emma, waiting to see how she would respond. But Emma didn't speak. She didn't need to. Richard stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. Belongs here? He repeated. Emma Lawson doesn't just belong here. She's the reason this night matters. His words carried weight, echoing through the ballroom. Confusion rippled across the crowd. Richard raised his hand and suddenly, the large projection screens lining the ballroom flickered to life. "You see," he continued, "while Andrew Lawson has been busy parading his new life, he's been hiding truths that this city deserves to know." The first image appeared, documents showing financial fraud within Andrew's company. Gasps filled the room. Another slide followed, emails and receipts proving how he funneled money to cover luxury trips with Cassandra while neglecting his responsibilities to investors and employees. Murmurs turned into outrage. Andrew lunged forward. "This is slander," he shouted, his voice cracking. But Richard didn't flinch. He pressed a button, and a final video filled the screen. It wasn't about money. It was about betrayal. A recording of Andrew mocking Emma, bragging to colleagues that she was nothing without him, and that some women are born to be stepped on. The room erupted. Women glared. Men shook their heads. Investors whispered furiously, already calculating their exits. Cassandra's face turned pale, her hand slipping from Andrew's arm as if his very touch burned. Emma finally spoke, her voice steady, her eyes locked on Andrew. "For years, you told me I was nothing. You tried to bury me in shame. But tonight everyone sees the truth. I was never the one who didn't belong. It was you." The applause started slowly, then grew, thunderous, drowning out Andrew's sputtering protests. Cameras flashed, capturing his humiliation from every angle. For the first time, Andrew wasn't the star of the night. He was the cautionary tale. Richard placed his arm around Emma, their children watching proudly from the side. The message was clear. Emma had risen, and Andrew had fallen. And as security moved closer to escort Andrew out, the crowd roared its approval. The stage he built for his triumph had become the stage of his ruin. The ballroom, once buzzing with polite chatter and shallow laughter, now stood united in thunderous applause. The spotlight was no longer on Andrew Lawson's arrogance or Cassandra's crimson gown. It was fixed on Emma Lawson, the woman who had walked into the lion's den and silenced it with nothing but grace, truth, and undeniable strength. Andrew's voice tried to cut through the roar, but his words were drowned by the clapping and the camera shutters. Security moved toward him, firm hands ready to escort him out. Cassandra slipped away, head bowed, her face pale with shame. She had come expecting glory, but was leaving as invisible as the lies she had built her life on. Emma, however, stood steady, her children by her side, Richard's hand warm at her back. For years she had been silent, hiding her pain behind closed doors. Tonight, she knew she couldn't stay silent anymore. Not just for herself, but for every woman who had ever been told she was nothing. She stepped forward. The microphone was still in place from the earlier speeches. Her hand trembled as she touched it, but when she spoke, her voice carried clear and strong across the ballroom. "For a long time," she began, her eyes sweeping the room, "I believed the words of a man who told me I was worthless. I believed I wasn't good enough, that I didn't deserve love, respect, or even happiness. And I stayed quiet while my spirit was broken." She paused, her children watching her with wide eyes. "But silence only feeds cruelty. Tonight I stand here to tell you, I was never nothing, and no woman, no person should ever be told otherwise." The room fell silent again, but this time it was a reverent silence. Every ear hung on her words. Even those who had once mocked her felt the sting of her truth. Emma's voice grew stronger. "We rise not because life is easy, but because we refuse to stay down. I stand here, not as Andrew's ex-wife, but as Emma Lawson, a mother, a teacher, a woman who refused to break. And if my story tells you anything, let it tell you this. Strength is born from pain, and dignity can never be taken. It can only be given away. I chose to take mine back." Tears shimmered in more than a few eyes. The applause returned, louder than before, filling the golden ballroom with something richer than wealth: justice. Richard kissed her temple, whispering words only she could hear. "You did it." Her children wrapped their arms around her waist, their faces glowing with pride. Emma closed her eyes for a brief moment, letting the applause wash over her like a cleansing tide. Across the room, Andrew was escorted out, his protests meaningless, his empire crumbling faster than he could imagine. The man who thought he could control her destiny was leaving in disgrace, while Emma claimed her new beginning. And as she walked off the stage, Emma smiled, not a smile of revenge, but of freedom. For the first time in years, her life wasn't defined by what she had lost, but by everything she had become. Her story closed not with humiliation, but with hope. And in that hope, every broken woman watching saw the possibility of their own rebirth. Outside the golden glow of the ballroom, the night was colder, harsher. The red carpet that had welcomed New York's elite now witnessed a very different kind of spectacle. Andrew Lawson stumbled out, his tuxedo disheveled, his face flushed with rage and fear. The cameras followed him like predators circling their prey, bulbs flashing, microphones thrust toward his face. "Mr. Lawson, do you have a response to the fraud allegations? Is it true you used company money for personal affairs? Were you lying to investors all this time?" Their questions came rapid fire, slicing through the fragile shield of arrogance Andrew tried to maintain. He barked, no comment, but his voice cracked, betraying the panic surging through him. Behind him, Cassandra trailed like a ghost. The confidence she had flaunted inside was gone, replaced by trembling hands and tear-streaked cheeks. Reporters shouted her name too, demanding answers. "Were you aware of his crimes? Are you part of the cover-up?" She couldn't respond. She lowered her head, pulling her shawl tighter, desperate to vanish. But there was no escape. As Andrew tried to push past the crowd, a figure emerged, a woman from his past. She wasn't dressed in silk or diamonds, she wore strength instead. Her voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "Andrew Lawson," she shouted. The crowd hushed, cameras swinging toward her. "Do you deny what you did to me?" Andrew froze. His face drained of color. "This isn't the place," he stammered. But it was too late. She held up her phone, pressing play. The speakers caught the sickening truth. Andrew's voice, recorded, mocking, threatening. The evidence of his abuse, his manipulation, his crimes. Gasps erupted from the crowd. Some reporters covered their mouths, others scribbled furiously. Andrew lunged toward her, but security intercepted. His protests turned into a pathetic struggle as officers stepped forward. "Andrew Lawson," one announced firmly, "you're under investigation for multiple charges. You need to come with us." "No, this is a mistake," he screamed, thrashing, his once polished image shattered in the glow of flashing lights. His wrists were cuffed, his head forced down as he was led into the waiting car. Cameras devoured every second. Cassandra collapsed onto the steps, sobbing uncontrollably. She had lost everything, her status, her reputation, her illusion of love. The whispers around her grew louder. She knew. She's ruined. How could she stand beside him? For Andrew, the empire he built on lies was gone in a single night. For Cassandra, the dream she chased turned into a nightmare she couldn't wake from. Inside, Emma didn't watch his arrest. She didn't need to. She had already won by rising above. But the city, the cameras, the world saw the justice unfold, and they would never forget the image. Andrew Lawson, once the man who thought he owned everything, dragged away in disgrace. And as the police car disappeared into the night, the lesson was clear. Power built on cruelty will always collapse, and karma never misses its mark. When Cassandra first stepped into Andrew Lawson's world, she thought she was walking into a dream. Red carpets, champagne toasts, designer gowns, all the glitter of a life she had only seen on magazine covers. She believed Andrew when he whispered promises of forever, when he draped her in jewels and told her she was his queen. But dreams built on another woman's pain always carry a curse, and Cassandra was about to feel it crash down. After Andrew's arrest outside the gala, Cassandra was left standing alone on the marble steps of the Astoria Grand. Cameras still swarmed, but now they weren't capturing her beauty, they were capturing her shame. Microphones jabbed at her like knives. Were you aware of his crimes? Did you benefit from stolen money? Were you complicit? Her lips trembled, but no words came. The woman who once reveled in attention now wished only to disappear. She clutched her shawl tighter, her mascara streaking down her cheeks as she fled into the night. But fleeing didn't save her. By morning, the tabloids were merciless, the mistress of a monster. Cassandra, glamour or greed? Her social media accounts exploded with comments, most of them venomous. Sponsors pulled out of deals. Friends stopped answering her calls. Even her family, embarrassed by the scandal, distanced themselves. In the weeks that followed, Cassandra's world shrank. The penthouse she once flaunted was seized as Andrew's assets were frozen. The credit card stopped working. The jewels were repossessed. She moved into a small rental apartment on the outskirts of the city, where the neighbors whispered when she walked past. But the worst loss wasn't material. it was the isolation. Cassandra had built her identity on being admired, envied, desired. Now, every glance felt like judgment. Invitations stopped coming. Photographers no longer cared. She scrolled through old photos of herself on yachts, at parties on Andrew's arm, and each one felt like a cruel reminder of the price she had paid for borrowed glory. Depression settled in. Days blurred together. She stopped answering calls altogether. She barely ate. The vibrant woman who once thrived under flashing lights became a shadow in her own dim apartment. Alone with her thoughts, she replayed Andrew's lies, the way he promised she was different, that she was better than Emma. But in the end, she realized the truth. She had been nothing more than a distraction, a pawn in his arrogance. And while Emma rose stronger, Cassandra crumbled. She had wanted to live in a fairy tale, but she had written herself into a tragedy. Her downfall was not just losing Andrew, it was losing herself, piece by piece, until there was nothing left but silence. For all the headlines, the flashing cameras, and the gasps of society, the real story of Emma Lawson's triumph was written quietly in the hearts of her children. They were too young to understand fraud, too innocent to grasp betrayal, but they had felt the shadows of it all. They had lived through the storm Andrew created, and their healing would be the truest measure of Emma's victory. Her daughter, Lily, was only 7 when Andrew left. She remembered the nights of confusion when her father didn't come home, the way Emma tried to smile through red eyes. Lily had once drawn pictures of their family with crayons, mom, dad, and baby brother holding hands. After the divorce, those pictures changed. She stopped drawing her father altogether. Her son, Jacob, was barely 3. His memories of Andrew were fragments, an angry voice, a slammed door, a stranger's cologne that lingered in the air. Jacob clung to Emma, sensing the weight she carried, his small arms wrapping around her legs as if to keep her from breaking apart. The collapse of their family could have left scars too deep to heal. But Emma refused to let her children inherit her pain. She fought not just for her dignity, but for their childhoods. She created routines that gave them security. Pancakes on Sunday mornings, bedtime stories every night, walks in the park, even when the winter air bit through their coats. These little rituals became anchors, reminders that love had not left with Andrew. When Richard entered their lives, the children were cautious. They had learned that promises could be broken. But Richard never forced himself into their hearts. He showed up quietly, with patience and consistency. He helped Lily with her homework, listened when she chattered about school plays, clapped the loudest when she performed on stage. He taught Jacob how to ride a bike, running beside him until the training wheels came off, cheering as if Jacob had won a race. The healing wasn't instant. There were nights Lily cried, asking why her father didn't love them enough to stay. There were mornings Jacob woke up calling for a dad who wasn't there. Emma held them close through every tear, whispering the same words, "You are loved. You are enough." Slowly, the truth began to take root. By the time of the gala, the transformation wasn't just Emma's. It was her children's too. They walked into that ballroom not as broken pieces of a broken family, but as part of something whole again. Lily, in her tiny dress, held her mother's hand with pride. Jacob, resting safely in Richard's arms, giggled at the sparkling chandeliers. The world saw Emma's triumph, but Emma saw something greater. The light returning to her children's eyes. Their laughter no longer carried fear. Their drawings once again showed a family, this time with Richard included, not as a replacement, but as a protector. Their healing was Emma's greatest revenge. Andrew had tried to shatter them, but instead, his betrayal became the reason they discovered love, stronger than anything he could ever give. And as the applause thundered that night, it wasn't just for Emma. It was for Lily and Jacob, 2 children who had survived the storm and learned to live in the sunlight again. By dawn, the city was no longer whispering, it was roaring. What had started as one night of humiliation inside the Astoria Grand had exploded into a media wildfire. Newspapers splashed the story across their front pages. Morning talk shows dissected it with gleeful intensity. Social media was ablaze with hashtags. Emma rises, justice at the gala, Andrew exposed. Headlines screamed, ex-wife returns with billionaire husband and children. Andrew Lawson arrested after shocking revelations at charity gala. From tears to triumph, the Emma Lawson story. Clips of the night went viral. The moment Emma stepped onto the red carpet, radiant in her midnight gown, was replayed endlessly, her calm smile becoming a symbol of quiet power. Another clip showed Andrew, red-faced and shouting, being escorted out in handcuffs. The contrast was too perfect. Hollywood couldn't have written it better. Every network wanted Emma. Producers flooded her inbox with interview requests. Magazines offered her cover spreads. A documentary crew even suggested turning her story into a feature film. Overnight, the woman Andrew once dismissed as nothing had become the most talked-about figure in New York. But the frenzy wasn't just about scandal. It was about inspiration. Women from across the country wrote to Emma, sharing their own stories of betrayal and survival. Emails poured in. "You gave me courage to leave. I finally feel seen. Thank you for reminding us we're not alone." Emma, once invisible, had become a voice for thousands who had been silenced. Meanwhile, Andrew's empire crumbled in real time. Investors abandoned his company by the hour, stock prices plunging. Former allies scrambled to distance themselves, claiming they never really trusted him. The same business journals that once praised his brilliance now labeled him a fraud, a cautionary tale of arrogance and corruption. Cassandra wasn't spared either. Tabloids dissected her downfall, showing photos of her crying on the gala steps. Once admired for her beauty, she was now painted as complicit in Andrew's lies. Memes mocked her, gossip sites ridiculed her. She vanished from the public eye, but the frenzy followed, ensuring she could never outrun the scandal. Through it all, Emma remained composed. She granted only one interview, standing beside Richard and her children. Her words were simple, but they resonated everywhere. "No one should allow another person to define their worth. I was told I was nothing, but I chose to believe I was more. And tonight I stand as proof that no betrayal, no cruelty can erase your value." The clip aired on primetime television, drawing millions of viewers. Commentators praised her poise, calling her a modern symbol of resilience. Overnight, Emma wasn't just Andrew's ex-wife. She was a movement. In the end, the media frenzy didn't crush her. It lifted her higher, turning her personal pain into public power. The city that once looked down on her now looked up, not just at her beauty, but at her courage. And as Emma watched the headlines scroll across the screen, she finally understood. Andrew had tried to use shame to silence her, but the world had chosen her voice instead. The gala had been the spark, but the courtroom became the firestorm. Weeks after Andrew Lawson's humiliating arrest, the city turned its eyes to the trial that promised to expose everything. The courthouse was surrounded daily by reporters, their cameras pointed at the heavy wooden doors where Andrew would appear, flanked by his lawyers, his arrogance slowly peeling away. Inside, the atmosphere was electric. Every bench was filled. Former investors, betrayed employees, and curious citizens crammed into the gallery. They wanted to see the man who had strutted through high society now forced to answer for his crimes. The prosecution wasted no time. They laid out a mountain of evidence: falsified documents, wire transfers, secret accounts hidden offshore. Screens lit up with incriminating emails where Andrew bragged about manipulating numbers. Witnesses testified, employees who had been pressured into silence, partners who had been cheated out of millions. Each revelation tightened the noose. But the most devastating blow didn't come from the fraud charges. It came from the testimonies of women who stood brave enough to tell their stories. One by one, they walked to the stand. Their voices shook, but their words were undeniable. They spoke of Andrew's abuse, his manipulation, the way he used power to trap and silence them. The courtroom grew heavier with each account. Even the judge's gavel couldn't stop the ripple of gasps. Andrew's lawyers tried to fight back, painting him as misunderstood, a victim of envy and revenge. But their arguments sounded hollow against the weight of the truth. Each cross-examination only revealed more cracks, more arrogance, more lies. And then came the twist that silenced even Andrew. Richard Hale, calm and composed, took the stand. He revealed the documents proving his quiet acquisition of Andrew's company shares, the evidence that Andrew's empire had already been crumbling. "Greed blinds men," Richard said, his voice steady, "but cruelty destroys them." His testimony not only exposed Andrew's corruption, but also stripped him of any last illusion of power. Throughout it all, Emma sat quietly in the gallery. She wasn't there to gloat. She wasn't there to relive her pain. She was there to see justice. Each time Andrew glanced her way, his eyes met not bitterness, but strength. That hurt him more than any evidence. The verdict came after weeks of testimony. The jury filed back into the courtroom, their faces stern, unflinching. The foreman rose. "We find the defendant, Andrew Lawson, guilty on all counts." The words echoed like thunder. The gallery erupted, some in applause, some in tears. Andrew slumped in his chair, his once proud shoulders now hunched, his face ashen. The judge's sentence was merciless. Years in prison, restitution to victims, his fortune seized, his legacy reduced to ashes. Outside, cameras captured his final walk in handcuffs, the image broadcast nationwide. For the man who once thought he was untouchable, it was the ultimate humiliation. Inside, Emma rose slowly, her children holding her hands. She looked at Richard, who nodded softly. Justice had been served. And as she stepped out of the courthouse into the bright sunlight, Emma knew the chapter was closed. Not with bitterness, but with peace. The man who tried to define her life was gone, and her story was finally her own. For years, Emma Lawson had lived in the shadow of betrayal, fighting simply to survive. But after the courtroom doors closed and justice was delivered, a new chapter finally began. One she never thought possible. It wasn't just freedom from Andrew's cruelty. It was the birth of a life filled with love, security, and hope. Emma's mornings no longer began with anxiety over unpaid bills or fear of eviction. Instead, she woke to the sound of laughter echoing through the sunlit halls of a home filled with warmth. Richard had given her a beautiful house, but more importantly, he gave her a safe place to rebuild her life. There were no slammed doors, no harsh words, only peace. Her children thrived in the new world. Lily, once hesitant to trust, began to blossom. She joined ballet, twirling across polished floors with joy in her eyes. Jacob, who once clung to Emma in fear, now raced across the backyard with boundless energy, his giggles filling the air. For them, this wasn't just a bigger house or nicer clothes. It was stability. It was a childhood restored. But Emma's new life wasn't about luxury. She didn't become someone else. She remained grounded, still teaching, still pouring her heart into the children at school. Only now, she taught with a new kind of confidence. Her students saw not just a teacher, but a woman who had walked through fire and emerged stronger. She became a role model, not for perfection, but for resilience. Richard never tried to overshadow her. Instead, he stood beside her, proud of her independence. He involved her in his philanthropic work, not as decoration, but as a partner. Together, they launched programs to support single mothers, offering scholarships, housing assistance, and mentorship. Emma knew the pain of being abandoned, and now she used her voice to make sure others never felt alone. The transformation wasn't loud, it was steady. She wasn't defined anymore by what she had lost, but by what she was building. For the first time in years, Emma allowed herself to dream, not just for survival, but for joy. She dreamed of family vacations, of watching her children graduate, of walking through life beside a man who respected her soul. And in quiet moments, when Richard wrapped his arms around her and her children's laughter echoed through the halls, Emma realized she had finally come home. Her story was no longer one of betrayal, but of rebirth. No longer about pain, but about promise. And the woman who was once called nothing had become everything she was always meant to be. When the dust of the courtroom settled, Emma Lawson's story didn't fade into yesterday's news. It grew, blossoming into something larger than she ever imagined. She had once been just a name whispered in pity, the poor ex-wife abandoned with children. Now, her name was spoken with admiration. She had become more than a survivor. She had become a symbol. It began with small gestures. Parents at Lily and Jacob's school stopped her in the hallways, offering hugs, telling her she inspired them. Teachers she once worked alongside whispered, "You gave me courage." Soon, her inbox was overflowing again, not with interview requests this time, but with letters from women across the country. Stories of heartbreak, of survival, of rebuilding. They told her, "Because of you, I left. Because of you, I believe I can rise too." Nonprofits invited her to speak at events. She stood on stages in community centers, universities, and even national conferences. Her voice steady, her message simple. Your worth is not defined by who walks away from you. It is defined by the strength you find in yourself. Every time she spoke, the audience rose to their feet. Magazines featured her not as scandal, but as inspiration. Time ran an article titled, "Emma Lawson, From Betrayal to Beacon of Hope." She appeared on morning shows, not to dwell on Andrew's downfall, but to discuss resilience, family, and the power of choosing dignity over despair. Each appearance spread her message further, and with it her image as a woman who had turned pain into purpose. Charities honored her. Awards followed. One night, at a black tie fundraiser, she was presented with a Courage in Action award. Standing at the podium, with Richard and her children beaming in the front row, Emma held the crystal plaque in trembling hands. She looked out at the applauding audience and said, "I never wanted to be a story. I just wanted to survive. But if my story can light the path for someone else, then every tear was worth it." Her influence reached even higher places. Lawmakers contacted her, asking for her input on policies supporting single mothers and victims of abuse. She wasn't just a symbol now. She was a voice shaping real change. Emma's scars had become her strength, her survival, her platform. And yet, through all the recognition, she remained humble. She returned each night to her home, to bedtime stories and laughter, to Richard's steady love. Fame didn't change her. It clarified her. She knew her role wasn't to bask in glory, but to serve as proof that dignity can rise from ashes. Her name had once been tied to Andrew Lawson, but now when people said Emma Lawson, they no longer thought of betrayal. They thought of courage. And as her story spread, Emma became more than a woman who survived. She became a mirror, reflecting back to society the truth it had too often ignored, that even the weakest-looking heart can carry unshakable strength. The man who once strutted through marble ballrooms now shuffled across cracked concrete floors. Andrew Lawson, once the darling of New York's elite, now wore a faded orange jumpsuit and a number on his chest. The walls of his world had shrunk to a cell no larger than the walk-in closet Cassandra once used for her gowns. The empire he built on lies had collapsed, leaving only dust and disgrace. Prison stripped him of everything. His tailored suits, his luxury watches, the entourage that once laughed at his cruel jokes. No one called him sir anymore. Guards barked orders. Inmates sneered, recognizing the fallen businessman whose face had been plastered across every newspaper. For them, Andrew was not a leader. He was prey. At night, lying on a thin mattress with springs digging into his back, Andrew replayed his downfall. He saw Emma's face, calm and steady, smiling in the ballroom while the crowd applauded her. He saw Richard standing tall, the very man who had quietly dismantled his empire. But what haunted him most were his children, Lily and Jacob, looking at Emma with love, looking at Richard with trust. He realized they would grow up without needing him. And for the first time, he wondered if they would even remember him at all. Cassandra never visited. After the scandal, she vanished, drowning in her own shame. The women he once flaunted as conquests erased his number from their phones. Business partners testified against him to save themselves. Even his own family, embarrassed by the headlines, sent word through lawyers that they wanted no contact. Loneliness pressed heavier than the prison walls. Andrew tried to mask it with anger, lashing out at guards, mocking other inmates. But rage couldn't drown regret. When the lights went out and the silence of the night echoed through the bars, Andrew confronted the truth. He was alone because he had destroyed every bridge with his arrogance. He thought money would buy loyalty. He thought charm would erase cruelty. But in the end, nothing remained. No empire, no mistress, no family, only shame. Weeks turned into months and his name faded from the headlines. The city moved on, celebrating Emma's rise while Andrew rotted in obscurity. His downfall became a cautionary tale whispered in boardrooms, "Don't be another Lawson." And so the man who once believed he was untouchable lived his days forgotten, his nights haunted by echoes of what he had lost. Not the penthouses or the cars, but the love he had thrown away. And in the silence of his prison cell, Andrew Lawson finally understood the cruelest punishment of all. Not the bars, not the sentence, but the knowledge that the woman he tried to destroy had risen higher than he ever would, while he had fallen lower than he ever imagined. Years had passed since the night of the gala that changed everything. Time had softened the sharp edges of Emma Lawson's pain, but it had also carved her into someone stronger, brighter, unforgettable. The world no longer remembered her as the poor, abandoned wife. They remembered her as the woman who rose. Emma's life was no longer about survival. It was about purpose. With Richard by her side, she created the Lawson Foundation for Resilience, a program dedicated to helping women and children rebuild their lives after betrayal, abuse, or abandonment. What began as a small initiative in New York grew into a nationwide network. Shelters were built, scholarships awarded, families supported. Each success story was a piece of Emma's legacy. At conferences and events, her presence commanded respect. She spoke not with bitterness, but with conviction. Her voice carried the weight of lived experience, reaching hearts that had long felt unseen. "Your scars," she often said, "are not signs of weakness. They are proof that you survived. And survival is the seed of triumph." The world listened. Politicians referenced her words in speeches. Universities invited her to give commencement addresses. Magazines named her one of the most influential women of the decade. Yet Emma never let recognition cloud her. At home, she was simply mom. She still cooked pancakes on Sundays, still walked Lily to ballet practice, still knelt on the grass to cheer for Jacob's soccer games. Her children grew in the light of her example. Lily became confident, her drawings now filled with bright colors and happy families. Jacob, curious and bold, told everyone his dream was to be strong like mom. Richard, proud and steady, often said that his greatest accomplishment wasn't his billions. It was winning Emma's heart. But Emma's true triumph was internal. She no longer carried the weight of Andrew's cruelty. His voice, once etched into her soul, had faded into nothing. She had rewritten her story, not as a victim, not as a survivor, but as a victor. One evening she stood on a stage in front of thousands, her children and Richard in the audience. The lights bathed her in gold, the crowd silent as they waited for her words. She smiled, her voice clear and steady. "I once thought my story ended when someone told me I was nothing, but tonight I stand before you as proof that no one, not a husband, not society, not betrayal, has the right to define your worth. Only you can. And when you choose to rise, no one can keep you down." The applause was deafening, not for glamour, but for truth. Tears streamed down faces in the audience. Emma's triumph wasn't just hers anymore. It belonged to everyone who had ever felt broken. And as she stepped down from the stage holding her children's hands, Emma knew she had given the world more than a story. She had given it hope, and that hope would outlive her, becoming her greatest legacy. The story of Emma Lawson began in heartbreak, but it did not end there. Her journey, once marked by tears in the shadows, had become a beacon of light that reached far beyond her own home. It was more than a tale of betrayal and revenge. It was a story of healing, justice, and redemption. Andrew Lawson's name had long faded into disgrace. His downfall was complete, his prison sentence ensuring that his legacy would forever be remembered as a warning. Where once people raised glasses to his success, now they shook their heads at his arrogance. He had tried to break a woman, and in the end, it was his own soul that shattered. Cassandra vanished into obscurity, her brief taste of luxury turning bitter. She became a ghost in the very society she once longed to impress, a reminder that stolen glory never lasts. But Emma rose. And she rose not with bitterness, but with grace. Justice had been served, but her true victory was in the life she built afterward. A life where her children laughed freely. A life where she was loved not for her sacrifices, but for who she was. A life where her voice, once silenced, now carried weight across the world. Years later, on a quiet afternoon, Emma sat in the garden of her home. Richard was reading nearby, their children, now older, chasing each other across the lawn. The sunlight filtered through the trees, warm and golden, and Emma closed her eyes, breathing it in. For the first time, she felt completely at peace. She thought back to the nights she almost gave up, the moments when the pain was too heavy to bear. If only that broken woman could see her now, she thought. She would whisper to her past self, "Hold on, the storm will end, and when it does, you'll stand in the sun again." Her journey had come full circle. The humiliation she once feared had turned into the stage of her greatest triumph. The scars she once hid had become her strength. And the love she once lost had been replaced with a love deeper, truer, and everlasting. As evening fell, Richard wrapped an arm around her shoulders, pressing a kiss to her hair. "We've come a long way," he murmured. Emma smiled softly, watching her children's laughter dance through the air. Yes, she said, and we're only just beginning. Her story no longer belonged to Andrew or to betrayal or to shame. It belonged to her children, to every person who found hope in her rise. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, Emma Lawson's tale closed not with tragedy, but with triumph. She had walked through fire, and she had emerged not burned, but reborn. And in that rebirth, the world found its most powerful truth. No betrayal can define you, and no darkness can silence the light of a woman who chooses to rise. So that's how the story closes, my wonderful friends. You're still here with me, until this moment, aren't you? If you are, it means something in Emma's journey touched your heart in a way words alone can't explain. Maybe you saw her strength and thought of your own scars. Maybe you felt her pain because you've lived it too. You see, life will break us all at some point. Betrayal, loss, disappointment, they come for everyone. But the Stoics remind us, we suffer more in imagination than in reality, Seneca. And Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "The obstacle is the way." Emma's story is living proof of that truth. The pain she endured wasn't the end of her. It became the very fire that shaped her into someone stronger, someone unshakable. And that's the lesson I hope stays with you. No betrayal defines you. No cruelty silences you. You hold the power to rise, just as Emma did. If this story moved you, please like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to our channel. Because here, we'll keep telling stories that heal, inspire, and remind us we are never truly broken.